first things I've got to find out is what this one is. I don't know if it's a 52 millimeter or is it a 50 millimeter top end. That is a 52 millimeter top end. I don't have a big bore Huztl right now, so let's check the squish on that. And maybe what we do is get that to the 20 thousandths that we like and start with that as a starting point. I guess this is an interesting exercise because I'm kind of curious to what they come stock, you know. Well, stock is a relative term, but the overall quality of the cylinder doesn't look bad at all. It really doesn't, you know. If this thing is in 20 thousandths, I'm just going to leave it right where it is and not touch it. Just build a saw around it, you know. But if it's up in the 40, 50 thousandths range, I'm going to build it. Let's just see how well they've been listening. Yeah, I've got to get a flywheel on this, so let me find a flywheel to put on. I'm going to put one of these lighter ones on. A little bit of increase in throttle response with these versus the heavier ones. From the junk pile. I've got so much of this stuff. Well, it's not hitting the cylinder, so that's good news, right? So let's go back to what we were doing and find out how much squish we have. It's not good news when it doesn't even hit the darn solder. It's not even hitting the solder. So we actually have a lot to do with that cylinder before it's actually useful. And the problem is I don't even know how far I have to go because it's not even hitting my solder. So I think the next thing I need to do is to pull the cylinder off, pull the rings off, and pull the base gasket out, and maybe I can find out then what we have for squish on this darn thing. That's not encouraging. Alright, let's get a better look at what we're dealing with here. It actually looks nice in there. It's a nice looking part. Plating looks nice. The combustion chamber has got a nice flat squish band. It almost looks like it's a chromed bore versus a nickel, but it looks better than in the past. Let's give it that. Now, back to squish. I don't know if the camera will show it, but that's a squish band, and the crown of the piston wants to get to about 18 to 20 thousandths at top dead center to that band right there. And what it does is it takes all the material that would be in here and squeezes it into the combustion chamber where it will be burned more efficiently. And if this distance between the crown of the piston and that right there gets into the 30, 40,000 range, really what happens is that ring of gas, it's like a washer shaped ring of gasoline air mix, actually is not going to even burn. It won't burn efficiently at all. And that of course hurts performance, but also, you know, the fuel efficiency of the machine. So what I'm looking at, I mean, the first thing people would do is just pull the base gasket, right? And while we're at it, let's take a look at the casting. It's not a bad looking part. You know, the plating looks way better than I've seen in the past. But anyway, let me pull this ring off. And let's see if I can get a measurement without the base gasket, just so I can get into some ballpark. And then I think I'm going to do the same thing with this one I did with the 50 millimeter, and that's chuck it up on the lathe. And one thing I can tell you is the quality of the parts, the rings, the wrist pin clips and stuff like that has definitely gotten better since the last time I looked at these. See, I really haven't looked at this series from Huztl or any other company for, oh my god, 4 or 5 years. You know, I did a series of videos on the 372s back in, I think, 2014, and that's really the last time that I looked at this stuff. So it's encouraging to me to see, you know, improvements like this. All right, just snug these up a little bit. Now I understand I'm kind of reviewing some concepts here like Squish Band and, you know, compression and stuff like that. I'm not trying to insult anyone's intelligence, but you kind of have to go through some of that, because really, more than any other modification, compression changes give you the best return on amount of effort, you know, given by far. There we go. So now we're actually hitting no base gasket. We actually got a mark. So let's see what the squish is with no base gasket. 45 thousandths. So let's think about this. If I want to have 20 thousandths squish and I still want to have a base gasket, right? So basically, whatever I measure for squish without the base gasket, I've got to remove that from the base of the cylinder in order to get the 20 thousandths squish, which is what's going to be defined by the base gasket itself. Now, you might ask, why don't manufacturers do that right from the factory? Think about this. Let's say you're in the field and you got to do a repair and you don't have a gasket and slap it back together. That means that the piston crown would be interfering with the combustion chamber. So the manufacturers, almost all of them, you know, they usually end up around 40 thousandths, which, you know, that's okay. But what happens is if a field repair is done without a base gasket, now you're at 20. And that's an acceptable number. In fact, a very good number. So let's take this cylinder and let me see if I've got an arbor for them. And if not, I'll make one. And let's get this to 20 thousandths and start with that. This brings up another anomaly. By taking that much material off the cylinder, where all the ports have now been dropped down in there. And you're now going to start having situations where the piston at bottom dead center still has interfered into the ports enough to restrict the flow. A lot of what you see when you see crazy blowdown numbers, and I know this is something people are going to argue about, but listen, it's just the way it is when a guy decks a cylinder and that cylinder comes down and now the bottoms of those transfer ports are below the crown of the piston. A lot of times what they're doing is raising those transfer ports simply because they have to get the cross-sectional area back. You know what I'm saying? Because it's being interfered with. about all I'm going to get out of it with the center rest, because I've already got it pierced into the aluminum. So basically I'm going to have to true that up and then build an arbor out of that. I've got to cut a chunk off of it too. So lots of machining to do. I want to get this one to 52 millimeter. So I'm just about 18 to 20 thousandths on this now. That's perfect. All I'm going to do with this one right here is just get the compression up, and I'm going to leave the ports alone for the time being. One of the things that I can address in this video is taking one of these Huztl aftermarket short blocks and blending it into a 372 X-Torq, because the things that I have to put into this are going to be the same. You know, for example, that's not going to work because that's for the X-Torq. I have to get a different filter holder and boot. Just a whole bunch of things have to be changed. I think I do have the right kind of filter holder right here. Yeah, I do. And this is going to be for a high top. I don't have one for a low top, I don't think. I'll try to find one if I can. But anyway, you know, the kind of things you have to change if you start out with a blown up 372 X-Torq with the cases that are whooped, and you end up with one of these Huztl short blocks, is you got to spend some more money because you need a carburetor. Now this is one from Huztl, so we're going to give it a try. You know, it's like 15 bucks. But you also have to come up with this particular bracket for the old style 372. This is aluminum. It's also from Huztl. I think it's better than OEM. But you see this little steel ring? You have to get that, plus you have to get a boot. And I would recommend going with the OEM boot. And that's part number 503964501. Don't go aftermarket. Get the real thing. I have a used one that I'm going to use. I don't know how good it is. I don't see any cracks in it. But for the purpose of this video, it's fine. Also, different screws for the carburetor. It's going to have these shorter ones. And that's part number 725530555. A different clamp. 505283301. You know, these little spacers to help line the carburetor up. Of course, the ring, the internal ring, and that's part number 503431801. You have to get this kind of stuff in order to convert these over. You know, there's just no way around it. So, basically, intake boot, through carburetor, through filter holder have to be changed for the old style top end to work. You can't put the new style X-Torq carburetor and intake on there because they're just all different, you know. So, with that in mind, what I'm going to do now is first get the handle on and then assemble the carburetor intake manifold on the cylinder, put the tray on there, and then put that much together, and then I really have to deal with details. Now the other thing I would suggest, simply because they're cheap, is getting a low top cover. This cover you'll probably have to use from the X-Torq, the top cover, but this one right here, the cylinder cover, the low top will work on the old style cylinders and makes the saw about a 1/2 inch shorter. Yeah, here's the high top cover, and it'll work on the same. We're going to use one of these from the 372s. Where I'm going with this is about what you would have to do in terms of the parts that you get to convert an X-Torq into something like this. And the assumption is that the bottom end's blown up and it's not salvageable, so you have to get a short block from Huztl for 120 bucks, you know. And you can never forget this little bushing. It goes right here. And it goes on like a 372 handle should. And you get the wires pulled back here so not in the way. Just like that. I don't know if you saw the angle, just sort of pop it in. Can't forget that right there. There's a part of me that says it's just probably better just to start with one of those kits. But so you have the X-Torq and it blew up, you know, I get it. And there's a lot of things you can salvage. And doing it this way is probably at least $100 cheaper than actually going through and getting a kit. Get the wires. There we go. Throttle cable is, it's okay. This is the tank vent. That's the fuel line. So let's get them through the tray, just like you would a standard 372. Nothing really different between this and any other production with a 372, you know. Okay. All right, let me get the intake boot on. All right, you're going to need a different clamp because it's a different manifold. And this one does go back far enough. So let me just crank that down. That one goes back far enough where the one that I got from the kit did not. And I mean, just a little bit, I was able to sort of work around it, but it does matter. Of course, the factory clamp doesn't allow you to over tighten because it butts up against there, which is nice. All right, we're going to put in an aftermarket carburetor. I have no idea how they work. We're going to find out, aren't we? That's part of this whole exercise. Put those little red sleeves in there. Don't forget that. And you can see the difference in the filter holders Not just, look, there's a difference in the height because that reflects the difference in the cylinder height, but look at the difference in the hole locations of old style versus new. So we'll put this on. So there's the different, the shorter screws for the carburetor. And then it just kind of bolts on in a normal way. Pretty much the way any 372 would. So there's basically a mix of OEM clamp, boot, and then Huztl bracket, which I think is better than OEM, and then a Huztl supplied carburetor with an OEM filter holder. Maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. We'll find out in a minute. Can you say low budget? All right, let's get this top end on. Now, just like with the other one, when you start bringing that cylinder down, run some cylinder bolts down through there. And do I have any? One. I take the pulse line at this point and stick it right through. If you can. Like that. And we will cut it to fit when the cylinder is down. Let me get those screws started first. Right there is the difference between the OEM boot that the distance away from the cylinder is correct, so that groove right there slides right onto the plastic tray. You know, no strain or pain. With the Huztl boot, that was out a little bit, and I had to really push hard to get it in there. There you go. There's a cylinder carburetor. Let's continue on. Of course, you can use the anti-vide spring from a X-Torq. So there's stuff. All the brake, the chain brake stuff can be reused. I did find an ignition, but unfortunately, it's a X-Torq ignition. It's going to be rev limited. So that's going to potentially bollocks up some of my future plans. And interestingly enough, the ignition that I have on here for an X-Torq will actually work better for the 52mm version than the 50mm version, because the big bores, you don't want to spin as fast as the 50mm ones. I stuck on the pull start off of one of the X-Torqs. I had to put a cable in there, or I had to put a rope in there, no big deal. And for the oil pump, I think I'm just going to put on the one that I had pulled off the last saw, and I was blaming it for issues that turned out to be a plugged little line. I put the little O-ring seal underneath that collar. And you cannot forget to put that in there as well. Two little tiny details. I don't know if I have the right screws. I think I do. I rarely do the chain brake on video because it's ugly. But there are a couple things that you have to pay attention to. And one is there's a little plastic piece that goes up there. You got to put that in there. Now, two, on the X-Torqs, because of how close the cylinder gets to the cases, they've got a stub right there instead of the full snap. And that's pretty unique to X-Torqs, okay? Second is make sure you've got the little pin. And make sure you don't have it like this. Make sure that you have the band going through that cutout so, you know, it actually can lay down flat. You know, what I do is I kind of lay it in there. I tap that down in. And you kind of set that right there on the pin. Right? The spring is out, that's going to have to come in after. Kind of set it in there, you put the spring in first, and that actually sets right down inside there. Then you put this lever in next. Every once in a while you got to sort of help it along. Like that. But now you got to start paying attention, because if you're not careful, all that stuff is going to spring right out of there. Now, the hard part is getting that in there. So I'm not going to show you how I do it. There's your clue. I get this on the end of the spring and I put it right in there, and I squeeze it in and get halfway, and then I got to take my thumb and push it down. But I'm not going to show it because that's not an approved way of doing things. It's my way. Very quickly after you've got that chain brake spring on there, you better get the cover on because it's going to come right out of there on you. Alright, so now we got to get a bearing, and we've got to get clutch and all that put in there. And on the nautical front, acquired this little 16-foot Sea Ray. I'm going to have to rip out the floor and possibly do stringers in that. We've already pulled most of the floor out. But it's going to be a project boat for the channel this summer. And it'll be fun. It'll be fun for me, you know. The trailer is okay. It's an aluminum trailer. And the hull finish is pretty good. I don't have any cracks in the gel coat or anything like that. The motor, I have to get the faceplate for it, but the young fella who sold it to me is a guy who works in trees, you know, got a young family, so that kind of pushed me over the edge knowing it was going to be a project boat. But I've got time to do stuff like that, and it kind of fit the configuration that I want. I was looking for the open bow because I'm going to make the floor kind of like a fishing boat where I can walk around. And I've always wanted to get another one of these 115 Mercs. I love those things. I know they're obsolete, but this one here is good. And overall looks in okay shape, you know. I think it'll be fun to blend that motor with this boat here after we get the floor in where I can get up around and do fishing, and that'll add more fishing content to the channel.